We're trying to make it to Manta Alley, and yeah, waves. Jen has decided she's going to hold on to the bed and make sure it doesn't go anywhere. I'm going to go check on the coffee maker. So good news, apparently the rough stuff was because we did make it to Manta Alley, so the Manta cleaning station dives are on. It is 80 degrees like last night, which is chilly, but not really for us, and we'll see what we see. There are actually 2 Mermaid liveaboards, and we found the Mermaid 1 had actually put in an appearance this morning. Manta rays are one of those big ticket, everybody wants to see them special sort of encounters, and these 2 dives are the ones that have the highest likelihood of seeing them. Basically, the spot which they call Manta Alley or the cleaning station is where they come in to get cleaned, so there's a reliable spot where they know to look for them. Unfortunately, my GoPro ate the footage from the first dive, so all of this is actually from the second dive we did, where we actually saw a few less manta than the first time. The initial part of the dive involves dropping down to about 80 feet and then sitting there on the ground waiting to see if the mantas come by. You are supposed to keep your distance from them and stay low to the ground so as not to scare them away. Now, because we're down at 80 feet, the air in our scuba tanks does not last as long, and also you can only stay down at that depth for so long until you run against your no decompression limits. The bottom time on the second dive is shorter than on the first, and so when we didn't see any mantas after a minute, the guide actually took us up to a higher spot where fortunately we had an encounter with a few more singletons. Now, since we were up close to the rocks, we actually had kind of surgy conditions off and on, and I ended up brushing up against some sort of soft coral. I knew it the instant it happened because all of a sudden there was this really, really painful burning on my right knee. The pain ended up fading after a couple of hours, which I was very grateful for because, as I mentioned before, I have had encounters with fire coral where the pain just lasted for weeks. The colder water in the area seemed to have a bunch of nutrients in it because the fish were going absolutely crazy for it. Busier dive sites can be a real pain, but one of the things I really enjoy is watching the massive trails of bubbles while we're at our safety stop. And we're not sure how many of those were the same mantas, but we saw mantas. I don't want to have to walk down here later in the day when it's like, when's 2, when's 4? And the second dive didn't go quite as well, but we did see a few mantas once we came up top, not at the cleaning station. Unfortunately, I did manage to brush a soft coral of some sort, so my knee is really painful. After the second Manta Alley dive, the boat relocated to the southern end of Rinka Island, where we'd be doing a site called Cannibal Rock.
Rock is little rock. When the tide is low, the rock is even moving.
93%. Okay, well that's good room floor. In addition to the slightly colder water down here on the southern end, we also had currents that were in a kind of challenging configuration. I basically spent a lot of my dives checking out clownfish, trying to find the smallest ones to make Jen happy. So this was Cannibal Rock. There's an underwater pinnacle out there where you can see the boat. Really cool dive, though we didn't have as good a visibility. Apparently there's Komodos out on that beach. They decided to load us into the dinghy and take us closer to the island so we could get a look at some of the Komodo dragons that sometimes wander out to the beach. We did see a couple, though obviously we weren't very close. There was going to be another opportunity the following day to see Komodo dragons when we went to the actual park on the island. Those are smaller than the ones we saw last time we were here, right?
Tiene por la izquierda o por la derecha.
No, no, todo quieto.
Oh. This is good, eh? It's pulsing.
And then it was time for our night dive. The original plan had been to do something called Torpedo Alley, but unfortunately, because the current was so strong, we couldn't do that. Current dives and night diving don't go together because you can end up swept out into the sea and not recovered. They found a nearby bay which was protected from the worst of the current, but unfortunately it wasn't really a highly prized dive site that had rocks, coral, anything else like that. And they did warn us that we were likely to see a fair amount of trash down there. So we knew from how the current was coming in that there was likely to be a little bit of trash underwater, but there was way more than we expected. It was just everywhere. Now, a lot of the trash that had been there for a little while was actually colonized by critters and the occasional coral. Still, it was just a real bummer, and I pretty much figured this would not be one of the all-time most memorable dives. At least, that's what I figured right up to the point when Tater signaled me that she had a problem with her regulator. She motioned for me to look at the gauge attached to her regulator, and basically every time she took a breath in, the gauge was dropping down near 0, and it was cutting off her breath as she breathed in all the way. Now, this did happen in about 25 foot of water and towards the end of the dive. She still handled it calmer than I would have in her circumstance. If I was in her shoes, I would have gone on my secondary regulator, my octo, just so I could have uninterrupted air while we figured out what was going on, but that's just Jen for you. So as I mentioned, Jen's regulator failed at the end of the dive, so once we realized what was going on, we basically just stuck really close so I could give her my octo if she needed it, ascended, did our safety stop, and we were on the surface. So that dive really was not the most memorable until right at the end. Basically, we were supposed to dive Torpedo Bay, but there was too much current. So we go into this other bay, dive, and it's just got trash and sand everywhere. But, you know, we spend an hour out there, we find some cool stuff. Then right at the end, Jen comes up and she's like, got a problem, and shows me her SPG. And when she takes a breath, the gauge goes from 700 to about 0. So we keep her close, go up, we try, you know, make sure the tank's all the way on. That's not fixing it, because if the tank's part way off, that'll happen sometimes. We get her on the surface and we start playing with it, and basically if you hit the purge on any of her regulators, it'll go whoosh, drops off really quick. Once we got back on the boat, we started testing it. Doesn't seem to happen with a full tank, but when you get on the lower end, I tried breathing off it, and basically you breathe like normal and then it just constricts at the end and cuts you off. That would have freaked me out if that had happened to me, because I have breathing anxiety issues, but she handled it pretty calmly. We were shallow and she was close to me, so she could have breathed off one of my regs, but yeah. And to think, on the way up, I was actually thinking, hey, you know, this is not one of those dives you're ever going to remember, since it was just kind of trashy and everything. Also, yes, this is an awesome scuba diving Komodo dragon statue that we bought.